Thank you, Steve, and good morning, everybody. I come to you from Monument, Colorado, where we've got about 8 inches of snow on the ground and 17 degrees outside. I want to echo Steve's comments of thanking you for the job you and all your healthcare colleagues across the nation do. On my very last combat, I was deployed in combat 3 different occasions, and on my very last deployment, when we returned home, we got a parade in the town that we were based in. I didn't really think we deserved that parade necessarily. We were just doing our job. So I got a parade I didn't deserve. You all deserve a parade. Unfortunately, you're probably not going to get one. But I do want to thank you for the work that you're doing out there, and thank you for tuning in today. What we're going to talk about today is just a few things that I have picked up in my career. It would be presumptive and arrogant of me to think that I could, in a 20-minute webinar, tell you how to lead. And I'm not even pretending that I'm going to do that. What I want to share with you, what I want to chat with you about, is tips that I have picked up, mostly because of mistakes that I made. And I think a lot of leaders build their toolbox of leadership repertoire, if you will, by finding different mistakes that they made throughout the way. So we're going to talk about these different things that leaders do in a time of crisis. It's probably not all inclusive. You probably have even better ideas with that, but these are my tips on it. I'm going to start this off with a quote. Whenever I was at the Air Force, excuse me, at the Air Force Academy, I played football, and our coach was a guy by the name of Fisher DeBerry. And at the time, Fisher DeBerry was the third winningest active coach in the NCAA, next to Bobby Bowden and Joe Paterno. He had a poster up in our locker room. We all thought Fisher DeBerry was as South Carolina folksy as folksy could be, and we all thought Fisher came up with this quote. Since we have the internet now, I've researched it. He didn't. But he told us he did, and so we all thought he did. And it says, if you see a turtle sitting on top of a fence post, you can be sure he didn't get there all by himself. Now, that probably has a lot of different meanings, but what I took from it is bosses don't succeed because of their own ability or their ability alone. Certainly, effective leadership is crucial to overall team success, but it's the people who get the job done. A boss only, so to speak, looks good if the people below him or her make him look good. And it's all about relationships. Your most important job is to get the most out of your people who work for you. You've got to be ready to be sometimes a boss, sometimes a motivator, possibly a mentor or a counselor, sometimes a disciplinarian. And, when I think back on my career, when I think of all the people in my life who've helped me, it's clear that all of my life goals were just a series of impossible fence posts that I simply could not have attained without someone or having done it all on my own. A quote from somebody that's maybe even just a little bit well known is former Secretary of State, former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Colin Powell. A lot of times we get the question, what is the difference between leadership and management? And that's really a very good question. At the beginning of World War II, President Eisenhower, was a lieutenant colonel in the Army. George Marshall, who was the chief of staff of the Army, recognized Eisenhower's ability to plan, to articulate, to motivate. And in 23 months, Lieutenant Colonel Eisenhower went to 5-star general in the Army because he was recognized as someone who could do those key things that what we do. The way I think about it is managers manage things, leaders lead people. Leaders need to have the vision to go from point A to point B and articulate that vision to gain buy-in from their troops. Managers, very important part of your structure, they do the things that we're doing now, except just a little bit better. And in my fighter unit, the way I think of it is I expected my captains and lieutenants to stay on course, to fly their airplane, to be safe. In other words, to manage their cockpit. Me as their commander, the way I looked at my role was to chart the course for them to stay on. I needed to lead them so that they knew where we were at and where we were going, that point A to point B. In charting this course, you need to remember what your greatest asset is, and that's your people. And so in managing your people or in leading your people, you have to maintain the accountability that they have. So again, your most important responsibility is to those people that work for you. And accountability is a two-way street. Not only are you going to hold your folks accountable for the things that you expect them to do, but they need to hold you accountable for the things that you need to do as a leader. And a couple of key points to that. First off, when you articulate your vision, focus on the why, not the what. People buy the why. We as leaders a lot of time make the mistake of telling people what to do. And while we might have short-term sustainment with that, we're not going to have long-term sustainment because people don't buy it in. Martin Luther King energized a civil rights movement with a speech. And of course, everybody knows what that speech is. It's "I have a dream." You never hear of the Martin Luther King "I have a plan" speech. The plan is the what. The dream is the why. And people buy the why. You have to make sure that you are conducting the crucial conversations with those people that are not living up to what you expect. And whenever I talk about weak actors or non-performers, I'm not talking about someone who's had insufficient training or where we as leaders failed them by empowering them to give them all the tools they needed in their toolbox. Really, I'm talking about the people that know what to do, how to do it, and why we're doing it. They just choose not to. And those weak actors are like a rotten apple that's in a barrel of other apples. Pretty soon they'll rot the entire organization. So you have to have that crucial conversation. And from Studer, what you permit, what you promote. Your folks don't think of it that way, but when you let people get by with things that are outside of the lines or the boundaries of what you expect for their behavior and their performance, what you're really doing, what you're really saying is you're promoting that. And so you have to make sure that that you are holding them accountable for what they're doing. And overall, the success of your organization is a combination of all those things: holding them accountable, giving them the responsibility to do it, and then making sure that they are empowered to do what you're doing. So let's talk about an equally important trait, and that is being decisive and adaptable. A lot of times in a crisis situation, you have to make quick and rapid and tough decisions. There are few situations where leaders have to do this, but certainly a crisis is one of them. Leaders need to be able to make decisions on the fly, and in some cases they may need to make the hard decisions, the ones that they know are not going to win them any brownie points. Mark Twain has a good quote. He says, "If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there." So the whole idea is you have to know what that point B is, and that point B is your key results. Your key results are the top goals that you want. Those key results may change in a crisis situation daily. And when you articulate what your overall key results are, or your metrics, put it in language like, we are going from X to Y by Z, where X is your current state. That's where we're at today. That's point A. We need to go to Y, which is point B, in a time-bound period. And so that everybody knows exactly what you're doing. What we highly recommend is you use team problem solving in high acuity situations. When you have to get the answer right and you have the time to talk about it, team problem solving can be very effective. And really it boils down to starting with your least experienced person in the room, or possibly the least likely to speak up. Look them in the eye and ask them, what do you recommend and why? If you start with the least experienced, then you're going to not only encourage and empower the participation of everybody that's on your leadership team, but you're also going to be getting possibly fresh eyes on it. Avoid what we call analysis paralysis. You know, George Patton said when he got 40% of the intel that he needed, he made a decision. And a good plan executed now is better than a perfect plan tomorrow. So you can't wait for that inspired solution. Make a decision, get out of the blocks, and then work your way along. You can always tweak your decision. You can always tweak it. You want to communicate that plan. And as Alan Bierling said in his webinar a couple weeks ago, you want to debrief everything. The reason why you want to debrief everything is because you get better every time you do it. Now, even though you've made the decision, that doesn't mean you've eliminated the chaos. You have to be able to control the chaos. You have to control your own emotions. If you ask any fighter pilot, What's the first thing you do? What were you trained? What was the first thing you do when the master caution light comes on and the fire warning light is blaring at you? They'll tell you, they'll say, wind the clock. And what that means is in our cockpit, most all of our cockpit was powered by electricity, obviously. There were just a couple of instruments in our cockpit that was not electric driven. And one of them was a little round clock that nobody used, and you had to wind it like an old-fashioned wristwatch or an old-fashioned desk clock to make it work. And so what was drilled into us when an emergency happens, the first thing you do is wind the clock. And what that does really is give you time and space. It lets you relax enough so that you say, hang on, let me catch my own emotions so that I don't portray that to everyone else. And then you want to delegate tasks. People need, in a crisis situation, something to do. They need to have something that is occupying their mind so that the fear and the stress and the emotion does not overcome them. You know, fear is just a natural reaction. It's a human reaction in a crisis to keep us safe. It's the fight or flight type of mentality we have. So when you delegate tasks, you give people something to do, and now they're on their way doing it. Praise the little things. There's a human truism, and that is behavior that gets rewarded gets repeated. When you go up to somebody and you say, hey, great job, Bob. Thanks for catching that. If you hadn't caught that, that could have really shut us down. Not only do they feel 10 foot tall, but they're going to repeat that type of behavior. They're going to do it again the next time. And as people go about this, show empathy. They're going to make mistakes. There's a great quote from one of my mentors who later on became the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Mark Welsh. And his quote was, people want to know how much you care long before they care how much you know. People are going to make mistakes. Investing in employees during tough times pays you huge dividends. Once things return to normal, the experiences that they have gone through and with you as their leader during the crisis will only make them more valuable to the team as they in the aftermath of all this. So as you walk through these problems and solutions, you also want to make sure that you're exercising caution. You know, JFK popularized a misinterpretation of the Chinese symbol for crisis. He said, crisis has two. The Chinese symbol for crisis has two parts to it. One means danger, the other means opportunity. That's not exactly true as far as the Chinese symbol. But the fact that a crisis does present danger and opportunity is true. It's okay for you to be transparent about your concerns for the risks that are going on out there. Let them know that you're concerned as well. What it does is not only it makes you more human, but it also lets them know that their own fears are not unfounded. Watch out for the red flags that pop up. And the takeaway from this is you got to watch for both clinical and teamwork red flags. Now, every healthcare person in a hospital, everybody who works for you is acutely aware of clinical red flags. That's what they're trained to do. They look for blood pressure, they look for temperature, they look for shortness of breath, all of those things. Research tells us the large portion of our mishaps happen because of a breakdown in teamwork and communication, not because we're technically incompetent, but because we don't work well as a team. And so look for those teamwork red flags, such as stress, fatigue, not communicating, an intentional violation of policy and procedures, disregarding non-conforming data. So look for those teamwork red flags, and the idea is you want to break that link in the chain. Any mishap that happens, it's usually because of a series of red flags that shown up and nobody took action. So as soon as you see the first one, break that link in the chain so that you don't go down that succession or that snowball path to an unwanted outcome. And so your actions with that have to be quick and measured with what you do. Above all, keep your head above the fray. Keep your head above the fray. You shouldn't be myopic and looking through the soda straw. In Desert Storm, we had in theater one dual qualified flight doc and pilot. F-15E pilot. He was flying a night low level into Baghdad to deliver ordnance. And he got so target fixated on looking for the target that he flew the airplane right into the ground. Because of that myopic soda straw view. As a leader, you have to have your head above the fray and make sure that you are exercising that caution to do it. Through all this, you need to, above all, probably stay positive. Your optimism will tell people that things are going to get better. There's a human truism that I picked up along the way, and that is teams adopt the leader's traits. If you are frantic and panicked, they are too. They're going to be the exact same way. It goes back to being a turtle on a fence post. You have to sometimes be their biggest cheerleader. So give them hope that things are going to get better. That contagious optimism is an incredible force multiplier. The ripple effect of a leader's enthusiasm and optimism is just awe-inspiring. When it's all over, your folks will, if you do this right, your folks will look to you with respect and a willingness to follow you into battle again the next time, because you're going to have to lead them in the aftermath. I'm going to finish this with a quote. I think it's a great quote. And I'm going to read it. The only slide I'm going to read word for word from Don Berwick, who was initially with the IHI and then later on became the president and CEO for CMS. The names of the patients whose lives you save can never be known. Your contribution will be what did not happen to them. And though they are unknown, you will know that mothers and fathers are at graduations and weddings they would have missed, that grandchildren will know grandparents they might never have known. Holidays will be taken, work completed, books read, symphonies heard, gardens tended without your work would never have been. When I read that one line in there, that grandchildren will know grandparents they might never have known, if I could just give you one little story where this gets very personal to me. A few years ago, I came home from work and my son, my little boy, Kyle, was passed out on his bedroom floor. I called 911 and Kyle and I took an ambulance ride down to Memorial Hospital in Colorado Springs, Colorado. He was admitted to the PICU unit there and he was diagnosed with encephalitis. That night he started running a real high fever of 106, 107. The nurses came in and put one of those blankets that had water going through it around him to try to break his fever. His fever wouldn't break. The doctor, Dr. Steve Smith, I'll never forget him, called me out in the hallway and said, hey, and I'd been talking to him all day. He was an infectious disease doctor. And he said, hey, I think you and your wife need to brace yourself. I'm not sure this is going to be a good outcome. And I'm thinking, my God, 48 hours ago, this is a happy, healthy little boy, and now you're telling me we're going to go home without him. And as you're painfully aware, not every story has a happy ending, but today Kyle is a happy, healthy little pain in the ass. The picture you see on your screen is not Kyle. It's Kyle's son, Jack, and his daughter, Ellie, my grandson and granddaughter. This picture wouldn't be possible without that healthcare team and those healthcare professionals at Memorial Hospital. If I walked up on that PICU unit today, nobody would recognize me, nor should they. I'm nobody. But you know what? I recognize every one of them. I recognize every doctor that evaluated him. I recognize every nurse that gave him a sponge bath with the love and care they would their own child. I recognize the health unit coordinator, a secretary, who came up one night and hugged me and said they wanted to put Kyle's name on their church's prayer list. I remember every one of them. They became part of my family because they saved my family. And that is the same impact that you and your healthcare professionals that work for you have on the impact that they have on the community that they serve. And again, I want to thank you for what you're doing. That concludes my briefing. I'll certainly open this up for questions.
Okay, thank you, Korky. That was outstanding. We are going to take questions. We've had a question come in already. We'll give this to Ozzie. Ozzie, as the crisis has unfolded, did it serve as a crucible to test the effectiveness of your leadership team? And so far, has everyone passed the test? Were all your leaders ready and able to lead effectively?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Yeah, so, I think with a pandemic situation that hasn't really kind of materialized since the Spanish flu, over 100 years ago. We always try to kind of have incident command and emergency management preparedness and readiness and do exercises and tabletop drills. I could tell you, being in South Florida, I don't just speak for myself at the Cleveland Clinic, but I'm sure all my other healthcare leadership partners throughout all of Florida, we are well-trained machines when it comes to managing crisis incident modes when hurricanes come and hit Florida, given that it's an annual event for the most part in preparation. I think the tricky part of dealing with the pandemic and the COVID crisis was that this was not necessarily, while certainly an emergency event and an incident management event, it's differed slightly because a hurricane is very operationally driven. A lot of preparations, managing through, and then the post-recovery piece, very operationally focused. This was an evolving thing. This was very clinically focused. Our teams needed to be reshifted. There's certainly the traditional structures of running an incident management team, but it is a little bit different. It required us as an entire team to shift a little bit from our end. And we needed to essentially create an effective organizational structure to be able to manage through the entire crisis itself. I will tell you that that there are a lot of things that Korky went through that were resonating with me throughout the entire presentation, and I'm going to call out a couple of them. I think he's spot on when he speaks to during a crisis and instilling confidence in the entire workforce and everybody involved within the healthcare sector. If you turn on the media outlets or you listen to anything that's going on or understand where it started and patient zero was in the Wuhan province and how it's essentially migrated all the way to the United States, there's a lot of fear factor that was out there, and you turn on and people just did not know or have enough information. So having that confidence and giving the shot in the arm to say, look, this is what we could get through, we'll get through this together, was very important. I also believe that information was coming very fast and furious. So there are times where we needed to be very decisive, and we cannot wait. You had an exposure that occurred, and it happened real time, and they're sitting in front of you, and you can't necessarily strategize about it or plan for it. You got to make a decision and then communicate that on after. So that leads me in a good segue to the third point, which is on the communication stream. Given that we needed to be quarantined and isolated and practice good social distancing, we needed to also essentially be conscious of how we were going to communicate to everybody. And I cannot tell you the importance of transparency to everybody, especially to all our caregivers that may be hearing different messages, either in the news or from other healthcare colleagues. And I'm not saying nobody's wrong, because information was coming from every angle, but we needed to explain, and Korky alluded to this, the why of what we're doing, and inform them of how we're doing. And there's probably no better microcosm situation of this during the pandemic, which has gotten a lot of attention, is the PPE shortage to be able to supply for the entire United States of America. That shortage, we need to explain how we need to be prepared for not just right now, but also for the future as well. So there were a lot of elements that came through from that end that we need to make sure that we were essentially being able to go ahead and provide that information to the caregiver, so they understand that this was not a decision about today. It was not only a decision about today, but also for the next few weeks, and who knows how long this crisis was going to end up happening as well. Last but not least, I will want to allude to General Stanley McChrystal published a book. I'm sure many of you have read it, The Team of Teams. That's one of the elements. Some of the principles there is something we exhibit at the Cleveland Clinic. We know that this entire crisis is very complicated, but it's also very complex. And I think that goes back to my first point, where we needed to reorganize ourselves to be able to communicate. We had to create teams that were of high focus and high attention that it deserved, like managing our PPE, managing a labor pool workforce that had done for the last 5, 10, 15 years one trade, and talk about in a surge crisis, what would we need to do and repurpose that entire workforce to do now an entirely new job function. Obviously, logistical planning, which we're all used to from an incident management standpoint, but then also how do we maintain our caregivers' well-being and wellness throughout the entire crisis itself. So we kind of mobilize into these 4 big buckets, and we're able to feed that and then uniformly manage that consistently across 5 counties throughout the entire Florida region.
Thank you, Ozzie. I want to let everyone know we're at 30 minutes, so if you need to go, feel free to do so. We're going to take more questions. We'll stay here as long as you need us. For those of you that need to go, we will make available Ozzie's and Korky's email so you can get your questions answered. Ozzie, one more question for you. Regarding your team's performance, can you think of an example of performance you found lacking or needing improvement, and what would you do to fix that for any future crises?
Yeah, I think, that's a great question, and I given it a little bit of thought as I saw it coming up. I think that one of the challenges that information was changing relatively fast. So for us, one of the key elements that I think we learned early on is we had a cadence of meetings for incident management where we would kind of receive information, report outs, and what have you. But what we found is that was not translating or communicating or cascading down quick enough. So we essentially executed multiple avenue streams. We created a daily update that sometimes came out once or twice a day. We started holding virtual town halls where we allowed anybody, whether they're working from home, working at one of our hospitals, working at one of our ambulatory clinics, to be able to post live video questions to the entire leadership team and provide answers on the spot for the questions that were being posed. We did video vignettes and started to be able to communicate to everybody to make sure that they were getting the latest from what we were seeing and what we were hearing, and explaining, again, to my earlier point, the why of what actions we were ultimately taking. I think it's so critical. The fragility of our workforce here was very important to maintain that constant communication, because in the absence of it, Korky, I think it would have crumbled, and you start seeing some kind of fallout that would come from that. So I think if I had to kind of explain what was the one thing that if I had to kind of rewind the clock and reposition it again, I would kind of launch it with a lot of active communication right from the get-go. Yeah, Korky, I think those are. It is not Pollyanna. Actually, I will take that part out of it and say it's a must-have from my perspective. You have to instill the confidence in the staff and the caregivers, knowing that they are going into, quote unquote, the line of fire, and telling them why we're doing what we're doing. And it cannot be if they had, in a normal day-to-day operation, they have no understanding of logistics management or supply chain management work streams or what have you. But guess what? This is just getting one example. In a crisis situation, they all need to be as informed as our supply chain leadership team and have that information at hand so that they could also truly understand the decisions that we were making, not only for now, but also to sustain operations within the next 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, in the anticipation of a surge. So I will tell you that's one element. The other element is also we exerted efforts, and again, that one group that focused on our caregiver wellness really focused on how is their well-being. If they had an exposure, it wasn't just go home, isolate, stay safe, and when you're ready in 10, 14 days, you can come back to work. There was an active, constant effort to maintain that engagement so that they don't necessarily feel isolated, and understand that every one soul or heartbeat is important to our organization. And we were going to go above and beyond to maintain that constant communication with them if they were taken out in some way, shape, or form, and understanding what that is. Providing we were one of the first to be able to provide hoteling accommodations. So these are the psyche that comes into play. I'm coming into healthcare, and I potentially could be exposed, and I live with elderly who are the most vulnerable right now. How do I avoid going now home and potentially doing some asymptomatic transmission to them where they would be more at risk than myself because I'm younger? We offered hoteling for our caregivers, that if they choose to use it, they could certainly go there and stay there and keep their family safe as well. So it's items, again, I used 2 examples like that, that to Grant's question, you got to maintain them knowing very well that they feel they are coming to work and feel at risk. So how do you combat that? By showing that effort. And it's not just by talking sometimes. I mean, it is, and saying we're going to do it, but also materially and tangibly delivering on that as well.